Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Silver, and I'm the chair of the Northampton Democratic City Committee. On behalf of the organizers of the Take Back Our Democracy Coalition, we want to welcome you to our virtual summit. There are over 400 registrants for today, activists and volunteers who are ready and eager to dig in. We move into the summit today with heavy hearts because of the virulent racism we've seen, most recently in Minneapolis, Georgia, Louisville, and Central Park. This must stop. We all have to push harder to fight for and build a democracy that will work for everyone. The polls show Trump behind in key states. We can extricate him and his sycophants from the office in November. In Maine, polls show Susan Collins behind by 9 points. We can defeat Collins, that person who voted to confirm Kavanaugh, to acquit Trump, and to give tax breaks to the wealthy. In North Carolina, polls show Democratic challenger Cal Cunningham in a toss-up race against Republican Tom Tillis for the US Senate seat. We can defeat Tillis, the person who voted to acquit Trump and to divert money from his own state to pay for the border wall. In Pennsylvania, Democrats outnumbered Republicans in requesting mail-in ballots 1.2 million to 500,000. If we can convince all those Democrats to vote in November, we can flip that state. These good signs don't just happen. Many people here and across the country have already engaged in activities to get where we are. But we need more volunteer power to keep this momentum going and to prevail in November. We welcome you to the summit and now turn to hear from the stellar array of presenters who will talk about the key races and how we can become involved in making a difference. Our kickoff speaker needs no introduction. Those of us who live in Representative McGovern's district and anyone who has met and had the privilege of working with him knows how fortunate we are to have McGovern in DC fighting tirelessly for our values, our democracy, and our humanity. Representative McGovern.
Hello, everyone. It's so great to be with you all this afternoon at the Take Back Our Democracy Summit. First, let me just say thank you to all the groups who helped pull together this important event. I'm so proud of all that you are doing to organize, mobilize, and energize our movement as we head into the most important election of our lifetime. I know many of us feel a little isolated right now. I sure do. It feels strange as a public servant not being in public in person every day, listening in person to voters and being out in our community in person. Not seeing my colleagues every day, my staff, or many family members. It's been a challenge. But just like all of you and like today's conference, I'm getting creative to make sure that our work goes on because we don't have a second to waste. Now, I don't have to tell you what's at stake this November. We need to keep our Democratic majority in the House so we can continue demonstrating to the American people what real leadership looks like and to hold this president accountable. We need to win a Democratic majority in the Senate so we can end Mitch McConnell's reign as the self-proclaimed Grim Reaper and stop him from packing our judiciary with anti-choice right-wing extremists. And yes, we need to kick Donald Trump out of the White House and restore some honor, integrity, and decency back to our institutions. Elections have consequences. Just imagine if folks like you hadn't organized in 2017 and 2018. Imagine where we would be without a Democratic House of Representatives right now. Donald Trump would have cemented his scheme to rig our 2020 elections, his corruption and criminality never uncovered for all the world to see by the work of our investigative committees. His cabinet of corruption would be virtually unaccountable, with no oversight to publicize their misuse of taxpayer money or their constant favors to corporate lobbyists. 12 weeks of paid parental leave for every federal employee in the United States would not be the law of the land. The CDC would not be studying gun violence for the first time in decades. The Senate's coronavirus relief bill would have remained a Fortune 500 bailout bill instead of putting families first. Protections for people with pre-existing conditions would would be gone, and the entire ACA would be at risk, meaning the millions and millions of people in this country would have lost their health insurance. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but you get the idea. Don't forget that this isn't just about Election Day. This is about the day after Election Day and every day after that. It's about our future. Democracy is hard work, and I don't want any of us to wake up and ask ourselves if there's anything more we could have done. So please use today to listen, to learn, and to get ready to take action. We need your help. Let me just leave you with one final thought. You know, when my old boss, Joe Moakley, became chairman of the Rules Committee, some people asked him, well, now that you're chairman and you have some power, are you going to settle all your old scores and get even with people? His response was always, some people think power means the ability to say no. I think power is the ability to say yes. See, that's what elections are about as well. Not just who has power, but how they use it. This November, will we elect a selfish government that says no, we can't, led by those whose highest purpose is the bottom line, devoid of justice and compassion, lacking in vision, desperate to return to the past? Or will we elect leaders who know that power is the ability to say yes, who tap into the creativity and courage of our people to make sure that nobody gets left behind? You know, leaders who know that our greatest days are always ahead of us and that nothing is impossible if we work together with purpose and passion. That's what's at stake. And I look forward to working with all of you as we continue to fight for what we believe in. So thank you, and please everybody stay safe.
Thank you, Representative McGovern. He really is a true inspiration for us all. Our next presenter is Bill Scher. Bill is a contributing editor to Politico magazine and a contributor to Real Clear Politics. He also co-hosts the online show and podcast, The DMZ, with CNN contributor and Daily Beast columnist, Matt Lewis. Bill?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for having me. I entitled this slideshow, The Wind is at the Democrats' Backs, and that is not to get folks to be cocky, because obviously the winds can change, but it is useful to know where things stand because you need to make strategic decisions where to deploy resources, and you can't do that without knowing exactly where the political landscape is. So we can go to the next slide, please. So if you look at the Real Clear Politics average, and they tend to average most polls out there, we have never seen Joe Biden's lead over Trump to dip lower than 4. And that is a different, more stable dynamic than what we saw in 2016. It's true that Hillary Clinton was ahead of Trump most of the time, but she had several dips beginning in the fall of 2015 and throughout the course of the campaign. There were several times when she not just fell below 4, but was in a near tide, even a couple of times slightly behind Trump. She ended with the average of 3.2, and that was only 1.1 points ahead of what her national popular vote margin was. So that's to say, number one, it's not accurate to say that polling is always completely wrong. The national polls were pretty darn close. There were some bigger whiffs on the state level, and state polling is more spotty and sketchy. But on the whole, the polling did give us a fairly accurate picture of how close 2016 was. Right now, Joe Biden's at 5.3 in the Real Clear Politics average. We're 5 months into 2020. We've had an impeachment. We're in a pandemic. We're in an economic shutdown. We've had a sexual assault allegation against the Democratic nominee, and that number has moved 0.4 points since January 1. It was 5.7 on January 1. It's 5.3 now. So that gives you a sense of how stable the current picture is. Now, I can't tell you if what's happening right now with the protesting around George Floyd. Is it possible that there would be a white backlash in favor of Trump after this? Could it be that the pandemic improves and the economy improves by the fall, and that changes things in Trump's favor? That's certainly possible. But I would just note that we've had a lot of stability in spite of a lot of very dramatic events. So even if there were big changes, it may not move the needle. And if the numbers do change, then you have to make those decisions based on new data. But we know now, to that last bullet point, it's not accurate to say that Joe Biden's numbers are analogous to Hillary Clinton's. His demographics are very different. He is doing better than Hillary Clinton as well as Barack Obama among seniors, among whites, and among independents. You look at the numbers in 2008, 2012, 2016, the older you get, the more conservative you get in exit polling. Biden's numbers are not like that. He it's more in a V. He's softest with middle-aged voters, and he gets better with senior voters. He might be a little soft in enthusiasm with young voters, but his lead over Trump is still very pronounced, and that's why he maintains an overall lead in the national polling and swing state polling. Can I get the next slide, please? So this is the current swing state picture. The blue are the safe Democratic states, the red are the safe Republican states, and the light brown are the competitive states, and those includes ones that are considered almost certainly toss-ups. You see on the top half of the screen, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, Florida, Wisconsin. Those are the ones where Biden is leading in the Real Clear Politics state averages. And then you have the ones where he is slightly trailing or significantly trailing: Ohio, North Carolina, Texas, Iowa, Georgia. Now that Georgia number, there have been a handful of polls recently where it's been closer, much closer than that, but they haven't been the Real Clear Politics average for one reason or another. They're not considered as credible outfits. So it could be that Georgia is even better than that. And a number of these states like Ohio, there just isn't a lot of polling. So I wouldn't take any of these numbers as hard because they're not polled as frequently as the national picture is. But having said that, they're all generally polling in the same direction. Biden is generally doing better than Hillary did in all these states. It's not like the averages are Biden up by 10 and Trump up by 5, so Biden's up in the average. It's a more stable, steady picture across the board. And if you look at those two states with the stripes, Maine and Nebraska, those are the states where you have the electoral college vote is somewhat distributed by congressional district, and Trump won the Maine second in 2008. And right now, the most recent Maine poll is Biden up by 10. If it's that big, he's almost surely picking up that congressional district that Democrats lost. And there's one Democratic internal poll that came out a few weeks ago where Biden was up by 11 in Nebraska second. So it'd be good to see more objective polling there to know that number is for real, but it's certainly possible that vote's in play. And if the race gets closer than it is right now, you could have a situation where those single electoral votes could make the difference. Can we go to the next slide, please? So you probably heard a lot of talk about how the Rust Belt is where this is going to be won and lost. And that's not necessarily true. There are multiple paths to 270 being the magic number for winning electoral college. The likely Dem number is at 232. If you pick up the states in the district that are most likely going to flip, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Maine second, they get you to 269. That would actually be a straight up electoral college tie if you stop right there. And then the next most likely state based on the current polling is not Wisconsin in the Rust Belt. It's not Ohio, it's Arizona. The polling's been very favorable to Biden in Arizona through the spring. So the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt, in my opinion, are of equal importance here. And Florida, who is a little bit better than Wisconsin for Biden right now, Florida's a lot of electoral votes. So if you win that, you're almost done once you pick up those 29 electoral votes. And then you got the states that are a little bit more of a reach right now: Ohio, North Carolina, Georgia, Texas, Iowa, Nebraska too. If it's a real wave election, you will see that wave crest in those places, and then you could get a real electoral college landslide. let's jump to the next slide, which shows us the Senate picture. And not every state has a Senate race because those are staggered. Right now, Democrats are 3 short in the Senate, assuming Biden wins. They would need 50 to break a Senate tie. And if Democrats lost the democratically held seat in Alabama, which some think is likely, they would need to net 4 elsewhere. And there are 4 toss-up states right now: Arizona, Colorado, Maine, and North Carolina. Those are all states that are Republican held, and that polls show the Democratic candidate, either the certain Democratic candidate or the likely Democratic candidate, to be well ahead or close. And then you have states where there's not a lot of polling, so it's hard to know how real it might be, but there are some indications that the race could become competitive. There are 2 races in Georgia right now, a traditional and a special, and Democrats are competitive there. Montana, the popular Democratic governor, Steve Bullock, is running. Most recent poll had him out by a decent margin, but you want to see more polling to know if that's for real. In Iowa, Joni Ernst is a little soft. But the point here is that how big the wave is going to impact how far Democrats can go in the Senate. Get out the vote operations are generally only good for 1, 2, 3, 4 points. You don't know which of these Senate races and which of the presidential states are going to be really tight, where the GOTV is going to matter most. Right now, there's a lot of options, a lot of possibilities where it might be close, and that's why it would make a lot of sense for Democrats to spread the map to make sure they can be competitive where at all places where it's possible the race could be close. I know I've gone on a little bit long. I know we want to talk about VP a little bit. Is this the last slide? That is the last slide. I'll say quickly on VP before we wrap up here, that people are going to look at VP as a tea leaf into how Joe Biden looks at the election. Does he look at this as a Rust Belt election or a Sun Belt election? Is it about white working class voters or younger diverse voters? Is it about ideological balance or moderate swing state? And I can't know what's going on in his head, but I think you can see from this picture that it's not an obvious calculation what the right pick is, and what he does might be a decision you may not agree with, and it's impossible to pick somebody that everyone's going to agree with. But the name of the game is to maintain a big intent as possible so you can win by a healthy margin. And I think part of the job of a GOTVer is to keep people inside the tent. So even if he's making a decision that you strategically disagree with, or you come across a voter that disagrees with, try to remind folks that big tent is the name of the game. I'll leave it there and kick it back to you, Elizabeth. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you so much, Bill. That was substantive and a useful overview of our key races, and we're all sitting up and taking notice. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Jonathan Asen. Jonathan is the Coordinated Campaign Director for the Maine Democratic Party. He was the Maine Coordinated Campaign Director for the 2016 election cycle. In between, he served as the Chief of Staff for the Maine Speaker of the House, Sarah Gideon. Jonathan, before that, served in numerous roles under President Obama, including as Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor to the Director of the Office of Legislative Affairs. Jonathan?
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you all for being here today. It is great to be with you from beautiful Portland, Maine, and I'm happy to hear that Bill talked a little bit about the importance of Maine in this year's election. All of you, I know many of you have been making calls already this cycle, and we are deeply appreciative of all you have done so far to help us. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about what is happening here in Maine, just to give some context, and then talk a little bit about the Senate race, which is certainly the most high-profile thing happening in Maine, and give a little context of why people here feel like Susan Collins has changed, and why we feel like this is the year where we can finally win that seat. So first of all, just a side note that I started my political career in 2008 working in New Hampshire on then Senator Barack Obama's campaign. And I was fortunate enough to have many, many volunteers from Massachusetts who would come up every weekend. So I just want to say thank you. Many of you helped me back in 2008, and we are again deeply appreciative of all you're doing in Maine this cycle. So in addition to the Senate race, which I'll talk about in a second, Bill already talked a little bit about Maine's 2nd Congressional District. Donald Trump won that district by 10 points in 2016. There are several electoral vote maps that show the race coming down to Maine's 2nd Congressional District. So we are working closely with the DNC and the Biden campaign to make sure that we can win that district back from Donald Trump. We also have Jared Golden, our congressman in the 2nd district, who is up for re-election this year. Again, thank you. Many of you helped with phone calls and canvassing in 2018, helped elect Jared. Jared represents a district that, again, Donald Trump won by 10 points in 2016. Jared won a incredibly close race, the closest race in the country in 2018, and the Republicans are targeting that. We are expecting it to be a very expensive, hard-fought election. So we are doing everything we can to make sure that we send Jared back to Congress. We know that if we're going to keep the House majority in 2020, Jared needs to be back in Congress. And then we have the Senate race. So everybody here is probably aware of the stakes in that race. And it's not really a surprise that Mainers feel like Susan Collins has turned their back on them. I grew up in Portland, Maine. I have many friends who have voted for Susan Collins at some point in their life. I read a poll a while back that 70% of Mainers have at one point voted for Susan Collins. So that sort of gives you the backdrop of what we're up against. But earlier this year, as many of you know, Morning Consult rated Susan Collins as the most unpopular senator in the country. She has not been accessible or accountable to her constituents. She hasn't held a town hall in more than 20 years. And now she's refusing to tell people how she voted in the primary, even though Donald Trump was the only person on the primary ballot here. Despite her refusal to talk to Mainers about these important issues, it's really important to know that her actions speak louder than words, and her actions make it clear that she has Donald Trump's back. According to CQ, she has voted with Donald Trump 94% of the time. She has defended his disastrous early response to the coronavirus crisis. She voted for a tax bill that hurt Maine families. And I did note that somebody put in the chat earlier, how are we going to reach voters in the rural parts of the 2nd Congressional District? And it is incredibly rural. I believe it is the biggest congressional district east of the Mississippi. Part of the reason that the way that we are reaching voters now is talking about that tax vote and how that hurt Maine families. And that is a message that is really resonating with people. It is no surprise, you all know this, Senator Collins voted to confirm Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, even though his extreme views threaten Mainers' rights. In fact, in the first 2 years of Donald Trump's presidency, she voted to confirm every single one of his judicial nominees. She voted to acquit Donald Trump, even though during his impeachment trial, and said that he had, quote, learned his lesson. She relied on his campaign staff to get her on the ballot this year, and Donald Trump has said he is 100% behind Susan Collins' reelection. So we have 3 great candidates running in our primary, which is now July 14th. There's a lot of excitement in Maine. We have our virtual rally tomorrow that is taking the place of our state convention. Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren are all speaking at it. We need your help. There will be sign-up information. I know many of you have made calls already, but we need all of you to do what you can to help us defeat Susan Collins, win back the 2nd Congressional District, and make sure that we send Jared Golden back to Congress. Thank you all for your time, and thanks for your help.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. I think you've laid it out pretty clearly why it's so critical to defeat Susan Collins and work throughout Maine to get Jared Golden reelected as well. So thank you. I would like to welcome our next presenter, Allison Jones. Allison is the Regional Organizing Director in Allegheny County for the Pennsylvania Democratic Party's Back to Blue Pennsylvania campaign. Before joining the Pennsylvania Dems, Allison was the Deputy Communications Director for presidential candidate Andrew Yang. And prior to that, she worked on campaigns from Virginia to California. She's now returned to her hometown in Pennsylvania for the 2020 elections. Allison?
Thank you so much for the introduction, Elizabeth. So as she mentioned, my name is Allison Jones. I'm the Regional Organizing Director for Allegheny County, which is where Pittsburgh is located. Next slide. So in 2016, we learned the consequences of being complacent, and Trump won by a very, very small margin. Next slide. However, in 2018, we began to gain some ground, and Senator Bob Casey won by over 500,000 votes. And with your support, we will flip PA back to blue in November. Next slide. So this is a little bit about our strategy. So tending to the base, we need to recover the Democrats that sat out in 2016. And a big part of that will be vote by mail. 1.7 million voters signed up for vote by mail, and 1.2 million were Democrats. And Allegheny County had the most vote by mail applications with over 208,000, and over 164,000 were Democrats. And that's even more than we had in Philadelphia County. So if you helped make calls to Allegheny County, a huge thank you goes out to you. Also, Democrats must pull younger voters to the polls in November. Voters under the age of 35 tend to be among Trump's fiercest critics, but they actually don't vote as often as older Pennsylvanians. Vote by mail will be a huge asset to them because in this group, you predominantly see college students, transient people, and new parents who aren't always thinking about voting. We also need to produce the widely predicted Democrat surge. There were strong indications during the 2018 midterms and special elections that state Democrats in Pennsylvania were locked and loaded for 2020. To beat Trump in PA, we must translate 2018's promise to 2020 results. If we fail to galvanize the Pittsburgh and Philadelphia suburbs, Trump will win PA in 2020, but we aren't going to let that happen. Next slide. So this is where you come in. So today is May 30th, and as of today, we are in what's called phase 2. So that includes ballot chasing. It's calling those voters to ensure those 164,000 Democrat voters in Allegheny County get that ballot returned before June 2nd. So we're calling and asking if they received the ballot, if they've sent it in, if they know where their community drop box is, and if they know how to fill out a provisional ballot if need be. And this is the first time Pennsylvania is doing vote by mail, so there's a lot of questions, but it's not new. It's people who've lived in California and other states that do vote by mail, so this is brand new. So voters do have a lot of questions, but they're typically pretty easy to answer. And we're also talking to sporadic voters about the general election and find the issues that matter most to them right now. Allegheny County in particular is so important. We need an absolute landslide victory in that county because we can't necessarily depend on the rural surrounding counties. We do have organizers in those areas trying to narrow the gap, but we really do need all hands on deck to turn out every Democrat in Allegheny County. Next slide. So the primary is June 2nd, so the day after that, on June 3rd, we'll begin what's called phase 3. And during that phase, we're going to start IDing for presidential and key legislative races in the state. Many primary races were contested, so during that time, we were required to remain neutral. But once a winner is decided, we will put all our resources behind that winner and start making calls into their district. We're also going to start building out our voter base through voter registration efforts. That's going to be digital until we can meet in person. We're not sure when that's going to be, but right now we are keeping all those efforts digital. And then during phase 3, we're also going to start identifying and training volunteer leaders. Next slide. So there are calling events from now until June 2nd. We have our statewide auto dialer as well as our regional virtual phone bank for Allegheny County. And those will continue in phase 3, where we will be asking voters what issues matter to them. And of course, we're gonna have a huge GOT fee push come November. We discovered that if just 2 or 3 people in each voting precinct in Pennsylvania would have showed up and voted for Hillary Clinton, she actually would have won Pennsylvania. So if you make calls with us, I promise even on your worst day, you're going to talk to more than 3 people. So this campaign really will boil down to every last phone call. If you're new to volunteering or need help with the technology we use, I'm available every day, as well as our data director. And we also hold trainings every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison. It's clear that we need to flip PA, and it's at the crux of this year's election. And I just should mention that we have at least 2 phone banks a week going now into Pennsylvania. So you'll hear about how you can sign up for that. Our next speaker is Richard L. Scher. Richard is the Deputy Coordinated Campaign Director for the North Carolina Democratic Party. Previously, he worked on Senator Warren's presidential bid as Virginia's organizing director, and in 2012, worked as a canvass director in Ohio. He worked for nonprofits run by Stacey Abrams, worked to flip the 6th Congressional District in Georgia, and is the founding consultant for a campaign firm in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to all the committees that have put this together, then put it back together as a virtual event, and still managed to get 232 attendees at my last count. Of course, none of this would be possible or necessarily worth it without our attendees here today, so thank you. It's an honor to be on the call this afternoon and to be back in Massachusetts, virtually at least. You and all your many Dunkin' Donuts welcomed me warmly and kept me wide awake while I was there. So thank you. Now that I'm here with you, though, I wanted to bring some news about what we're doing with the coordinated campaign in North Carolina. We have officially begun our coordinated, quickly scaled up our operation, and are working hard to support candidates up and down the ballot. And that's critical to winning all across the state, and do so in a way that helps to maximize the resources of all of our partners and stakeholders, whether that's on individual campaigns or just in the party itself. Now, why is that important? Next slide, please. So Democrats can take back the US Senate this cycle if a lot goes right. And judging by this call, I think we're headed in the right direction. Nationally, we've got a lot of opportunities for pickups, but if everything goes well, on the next slide, it could be Cal Cunningham versus Senator Tom Tillis that finally flips it. So Senator Tillis not only continues to show that he doesn't care to represent the interests of North Carolina, but instead goes all the way in the other direction and acts more and more like a rubber stamp for Trump as we get closer to the big day. So speaking of Trump, on the next slide, in the last 2 presidential elections, the Republican candidate has eked out a victory by at least 2 percentage points. So we've got to flip that trend, and here's what we're doing about that. And that's the end of my slides. Historically speaking, it's a bit early in the cycle to be making these sorts of investments into the field, but in North Carolina, we have already just under 75 people on staff on the coordinated campaign. We've already hosted a digital weekend of action, and that's big, but it is not quite big enough. We need all the help we can get to push us over the edge, and with a goal of calling every single Democrat in the state by the end of June. I'm definitely going to need your help there. We will be sharing out all of the many ways that you can get involved and help us, call voters, whether that is through a virtual phone bank or through an auto dialer system. Might even be rolling out texts in time to get it to volunteers on this call today. But we're going to need to be firing on all cylinders if we want to win North Carolina and win that Senate seat. Amid a global health crisis, we're facing quite a lot of new challenges in the field. But again, That's why we're investing early, and that's why I'm happy for the opportunity to be with you today. So that by the time we get to Election Day, we're all off the sidelines and can have a reason to celebrate. Wasn't really planning on going into all the minutia about our field plan. We're wrapping up a big phase of growing our staff, getting into some volunteer recruitment and leadership identification and development. And as we're approaching this milestone of calling every registered Democrat in the state, we're looking to continue to grow our volunteer base by taking advantage of out-of-state volunteerism. And that's where you come in, and that's why I'm happy to have so many people on the call today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's enlightening to know how critical North Carolina is, but also how possible it is to flip it on so many levels. This is a big race. We're going to start phone banking into North Carolina about mid-June. So everybody stay tuned for the announcements on that. But thank you again, Richard, for coming all this way from North Carolina. Our next speaker is Wendy Berg. Wendy is a local person. She's a retired lawyer, an activist, and co-founder of the Northampton Resistance Huddle. Wendy?
Hi, I'm part of a group of about a dozen people who've been doing political action through writing cards and letters for the past 3 years. And I want to share with you in this time of COVID, how we have continued to do our work in a safe way, and to avoid going into post offices, copy centers, into each other's homes, or even to go out at all. So we meet virtually 1 hour a week by Zoom, and each of us order online pre-stamped postcards from the post office. They kind of look like this, and we receive these batches of these cards in our respective residence by mail. And then 2 of us are, we have signed on to Postcard to Voters, to those campaigns. They're designated Get Out the Vote campaigns in various states and vote by mail campaigns. And each of us obtained 50 addresses each, so that enabling us to send out about 100 cards a week with messages going to go on the cards. And then we send these addresses to a third person who divvies them up amongst us and sends them out by email. And we continue to meet virtually in order to connect with each other and to motivate ourselves to effectively and safely continue this political work. I know there are other groups in the community who are doing this and or similar things to this. And so I encourage you to if you feel like this is the way to be safe, this is a good opportunity, and you can form your own groups if you want. I'm happy to answer questions. I also just want to thank everybody for the work that you've been doing and are going to continue to do, and on to victory in November.
Thanks so much, Wendy. It's good to know political work can be fun and productive at the same time. So I think you're right. We all need to join in our own ways and connect with each other while we're doing that. Our next speaker is Susan Labandibar. Susan is a powerhouse. She plays dual roles at Swing Left. She's the regional organizing coordinator for Swing Left in New England, and she's the founder of Swing Left Greater Boston, one of the largest Swing Left groups in the country. She's an energetic and passionate volunteer who provides support to New England activists and working night and day to take back our democracy. Susan?
Thanks, Elizabeth. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Wendy. Thank you for doing that. You know, after COVID hit, we all had to really scramble, and it sounds like you really found a good way to move forward in safety and security. And that's it. It's a question of not being daunted. And another person who gives me hope and inspiration is Elizabeth Silver. And so I was very happy when she asked me to kind of close the deal for those of you who are not already up to your eyeballs in electoral activism. And in fact, since 2018, actually the only thing that's kept me sane is the power and the privilege of working with people who share the same passion, which is to get rid of Trump and to put Mitch McConnell out of a job. And I'm going to give you 5 reasons why we can be effective electoral activists, all without leaving Massachusetts. The first reason is obvious, and I don't think you'd be here if you didn't agree with me, that now is the time to take action. The election is sneaking up on us. Did you know that in Pennsylvania, voters will be able to cast their ballots in the presidential election starting on September 14th? That is only 3.5 months away. Right now, we're in the sweet spot. With where we are in the electoral cycle, voters are starting to think about the election, but we're not so close to it that our efforts to connect with voters will be lost in a sea of noise. The second reason that we can be effective from where we are is that this election is shaping up like no other. COVID-19 and renewed Republican efforts to suppress the vote have made it especially difficult for Democratic candidates who rely on registering and turning out new voters, many of whom come from the same populations most affected by COVID-19. As one example of the challenges we face, the Secretary of State in Maine has just reported that voter registration is down 90%. Meanwhile, the Republican Party, not content with the incredible voting challenges Americans already face, have a plan to spend $50 million to suppress the vote, spread rumors of voter fraud, and create even more voter uncertainty. But my third point is that with all this challenge comes opportunity for us here in the Blue Bubble. We no longer need to drive to New Hampshire to make a difference in the election. We can foil the Republican plot from the comfort of our own homes, and the tools available to our partners on the ground are equally available to us. Vote by mail has become a unique opportunity to fight voter suppression and help give voters a safe way to cast their ballot. At the same time, we know that people of color and young people do not vote absentee at the same rates. Before COVID struck, about 10% of all the voters in this country, about 20 million people, were enrolled in a permanent absentee ballot program. But of those 20 million, just 3% were African American. What a huge opportunity for us to reach out. Luckily, we are able to connect with voters in swing states, identify our supporters, and give them practical information on how to navigate voting challenges. And that brings me to my fourth point, is that the tactics that we employ to contact voters are effective and they do work, especially if we're all doing it. There are, of course, many ways to reach out to voters, including advertising, social media, texting, relational voter contact, but the 2 tactics that our friends on the ground most need help with are phone banking and letter writing. Phone banking is the fastest and easiest way to make a difference in this election, and you can do it from home. As you know, more people are answering the phone than previously. Not only are contact rates up, but the calling software we use is smarter than before. When we call voters in Maine, for example, the software removes wrong numbers, identifies which numbers are cell numbers, and even texts the cell phone numbers of the people we don't talk to, which effectively doubles our contact rate. Making phone calls is also less intimidating than it was before. Many of the calls we are making are to friendly registered Democrats. With all the confusion around the election, there is more opportunity to help people with the process of voting. In a recent primary election in Wisconsin, voters contacted by telephone were 59% more likely to return their ballot than those we couldn't reach. My final point is this: you're very lucky to be here in Massachusetts, especially if you are here in Western Mass, where there's a robust network of activists who are already deeply engaged in this battle. By my count, we've already hosted over 651 postcard and letter writing events and sent hundreds of thousands of letters and postcards to voters in swing states. Elizabeth Silver and her colleagues were first out of the gate with phone banks for the Maine Dems. They've been hosting phone banks since October 2019. And now the Massachusetts network of Maine phone bankers is making 5,000 to 6,000 calls a week. Meanwhile, an army of postcard writers is sending 20,000 vote-by-mail applications to Florida registered Democrats every month. And this very weekend, there are 5 phone banks hosted by Massachusetts volunteers to remind Democrats in Pennsylvania to turn in their absentee ballots before the June 2nd primary. Even though COVID-19 has changed this election and the Republicans are aiming to suppress the vote, we won't let them do it. Together, we'll use proven tactics that will lift the vote. Are you ready to dive in? Are you ready to contact voters by phone, text, postcard, and letter? Are you willing to call your friends in swing states and get them to not just vote, but to volunteer? Or if you're not able to volunteer your time, will you choose Democratic candidates who need your financial support? So let's get the message out there. We're in this together, and together we can win. Are you ready to join us?
Thank you, Susan. Yes, I hope everybody out there is ready to join and plug in. Susan's right, we have phone banks going weekly into Maine, into Pennsylvania, shortly into North Carolina. Swing Left has been postcarding and letter writing for months very, very effectively. So it's encouraging and energizing to know these tactics work. Now that we've had this chance to hear from these amazing presenters, I want to welcome Sam Hopper, who has been the backbone of our coalition from the start. Sam has run all things tech, so everything that's happened today, we have Sam to thank for that. Sam is going to tell us how to volunteer. Sam?
Thanks so much, Elizabeth, and thanks to all our great speakers today. And a big thanks to all of you who have joined. We need your help to take back our democracy. So you've heard about the work that's ahead of us and why it's important to get involved. And now is your first chance to do that. Sign up to volunteer. You can sign up to volunteer at any time by visiting this website. It's www.tinyurl.com/TBOD volunteer. And don't worry, we'll send that out to you later as well. But folks who are here on the call joining by the web or by the app, you actually can sign up to volunteer right now. I'm going to launch a poll, and we'd love it if you would take a minute to fill it out. It is a very quick poll. It's 8 very simple, short questions. Just what activities and what races are you interested in volunteering on? So please take a minute to go through it. It does not obligate you. If you fill this out, you're not obligated to do anything, but rather you're going to be in the know when there's activities and actions that you can join. And like our speakers have said already, there's stuff that's been happening since last October. So we'd encourage you to join so we can do this together. Tomorrow, you're also going to get a follow-up email, and there'll be a link to the sign up. I know some folks are calling in, so we don't want to leave you out. Please share that link with your friends so we can get people to sign up and do this together. It's going to take all of us to take back our democracy. Thank you so much for signing up to volunteer, and I'm going to kick it back to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Sam, and thank you to everybody who is now filling out this poll at a great speed and great rate, and we need all the help we can possibly muster out there. So again, I wanted to thank all of our speakers and presenters today, your leadership and your time, and for giving us a roadmap to how we can make it through these elections in 2020. And work to take back our democracy. Thank you again to Sam. The summit wouldn't have happened without your technical savvy, so we're very, very grateful. We can win in November. We can do this. We can flip the Senate, we can keep the House, and we can oust that maniac from the White House. We all need to contribute to that effort to make it happen. So please complete the poll that Sam just put up if you can, and understand that tomorrow you're going to be getting an email link with the link to the, an email with a link to the volunteer poll. So you'll be able to take some time and think about it too if you can't do it right now. We will be in touch with each and every one of you that wants to volunteer. There are lots and lots of opportunities, and there's something for everybody. I wanted to thank all of you for joining us today. It's been great, and please get out there and volunteer, and let's take back our democracy. Thanks.